But in all fairness to this guy, we haven't heard the argument before with such a magnitude of stupidity mixed into it.
This is true. This is true. Credit where credit is due.
Don't want to shortchange him.
Right. Best construction on everything.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi folks, welcome to another week of Armed Lutheran Radio, where we talk about guns, hunting, competition, and the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. This is episode 107. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this episode is brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made, custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. CooksHolsters.com. So, how was your week? I finally got to the range last weekend, and it was awful. For those of you who missed my Facebook post, it finally warmed up, and I started out, I thought, all right, this is going to be a great day. It's supposed to be, it's supposed to get colder in the evening, but I figured I'd go early afternoon, get some shooting in, zero my new pistol caliber carbine, and have run a few drills, try out a few, just test run a few guns that I'd gotten back from the Cerakote shop. It finally had warmed up, so I was excited. I got everything loaded up. I had a long sleeve shirt on under my shooting shirt, and it was warm outside when I was loading the gear into the truck, and for some reason, something said, it may be too warm when I get to the range and I'm standing out there in the sun. So I dumped the long sleeve shirt. That was mistake number one. Then I got to the range, and sure enough, it wasn't as warm as I thought it was going to be. It was not as warm as it had been at home, and it wasn't freezing cold, but it was uncomfortable. And like I've mentioned before, I hate the cold. I don't like going and shooting in the cold. But if I'd kept the long sleeves, it would have been fine. It was a little windy, which made it a little less comfortable. But the sleeves, if I'd kept them, it would have been a good thing. I didn't. I had a baggy hoodie sweatshirt in the truck, but it's not easy to practice, drawing your gun from a holster with a big baggy sweatshirt on. So I went ahead with the short sleeves, got everything set up my targets, set up everything to run my drills, got to the line, loaded my gun, pushed the button on my timer, and the battery was dead. So I went and dug through my range bag, didn't have a spare 9-volt battery. So back up and punt, go back to plan B, which was to try to download a shot timer on my phone. Have you ever tried to do that? Have you tried any of those out? They suck. The first one that I tried out, it registered a shot for pretty much every ambient noise on the range. It didn't matter how I adjusted the settings. I fired 3 shots and it recorded 24. So I threw that one away, downloaded another one, and then another one. They all stink. They're terrible. They suck. So I gave up. I ran the drills with no timer, just basically, a little, essentially, a few live fire drills with no timer. It was fine, but it wasn't what I was planning on doing. I wanted to also try out the new 5x5 classifier that IDPA has put out, but without a timer, it's not really helpful. So then I went and I set up my my new pistol caliber carbine. I bought a 9mm upper from Palmetto State Armory several months back. I don't remember when it was, 3 or 4 months back when they had them on sale for $199 shipped. But they didn't have the lower on sale. So I waited until the lower was on sale. They were out of stock for a long while. And then finally, a couple of months later, right before Christmas, they were back in stock for $249 shipped. So I grabbed one. For Christmas, I got a red dot from Dagger Defense, a nice little sight, 3 reticles in red or green and variable brightness. I thought I would take that out and zero it. And apparently, when I took it out and tested out the reticles and did a little dry firing with it, I left it on. So the battery was almost dead when I got it out at the range. And the dot was visible, still usable, but it was very faint. And unfortunately, it requires a certain size Allen wrench to adjust for elevation and windage. So I could not tweak it. It looks like it's shooting maybe 3 or 4 inches low at 20 yards, so I'm going to have to adjust it next time. I'll tweak it here at home a little bit and then take it to the range and fine-tune it. But so the futility of my trip finally drove me to pack up my stuff and go home, and then I had a flat tire on the way home. I'd never changed the tire on this pickup truck before. There's this little chain pulley thing underneath that holds the tire under the bed of the truck. It's weird. I've never seen that before. You have to put together 3 or 4 rods on together and poke them through the back of the bed underneath the license plate or just above the license plate, stick it in a slot and twist it and keep twisting it until it lowers I guess that's how they all work. I don't know. But I've never done that before. It was weird. I probably should have gotten out the owner's manual to figure that out instead of noodling around for 10 or 15 minutes trying to figure it out. But so not exactly a productive range trip to be honest, but there were lessons learned. First off, always dress for the weather. Even if you think it's going to be fine, if your gut tells you it might not be, or even if your gut doesn't tell you it might not be. If your gut tells you something stupid like my gut did, which was, oh, it'll be too warm, take your stuff anyway. Just throw it in the truck or put it in the car and keep it there because the range conditions may be completely different from the conditions at your house. And they may change when you're there. So always be prepared that way. Pack extra gear. Just in case the weather changes. That hoodie that I had left in the truck, that was nice, especially when the temperature dropped and I was out there trying to change the tire. Always keep a good toolkit in your range bag with everything you might possibly need to work on the guns that you're shooting that day. I have a cleaning kit that I carry with me and I have a multi-tool, but neither one of them had Allen wrenches the size that I needed to adjust that red dot. So make sure, you can get those little Allen wrench tools that, they all pop out, flip out, or you can get them like a bunch of different sizes on a keychain. Get one of those, take it with you everywhere. And finally, make sure that you know all the different kinds of batteries that all your electronic gear requires and that you have extras in your range bag. I had extra AA batteries for my earmuffs, but not 9-volt batteries for my shot timer. So always make sure that you know what kind of batteries your electronics need and you've got extras. And last but not least, read the owner's manual that comes with your vehicle so that you know how to do things like get the spare tire out from under the bed of the truck if you're ever stuck with a flat tire in the parking lot of a liquor store late in the evening. All right, so what have we got for you today? Aaron Israel has been traveling for work this week, so he's not going to be with us this week. He'll be back next week, Lord willing. Mia was going to be with us, but she had a tip planned, but she decided at the last minute she wanted to confirm some details before sending something to us. We don't do fake news here at Armed Lutheran Radio. We double-check our facts, folks. So kudos to Mia for wanting to get every detail before commenting on something. I appreciate that, and I think you will too. Sergeant Bill Sylvia is with us again with another Ballistic Minute, talking about dry fire again, but this time talking about tools that you can use to make your dry fire practice more productive. And Pastor Bennett is back for another episode of Clinging to God and Guns, where we've got a hate-filled rant from a Catholic writer at pathos.com who thinks that you and I are heretic antinomians because we won't submit to additional gun laws. All that's coming your way right after this brief timeout. You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a proud member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.
The percentage of women who own guns is growing. American women are more knowledgeable and better equipped to defend themselves than ever before. So, why is it that every time I go to a gun shop, I feel like they're talking down to me? Like, hey little lady, let me show you what you need. It's like all they want to do is sell me a pink gun. If you're tired of feeling that too, visit Guns for Gals, a specialty firearms boutique designed to empower women with information about firearm safety and to equip them with the means to protect themselves. The owners go out of their way to find products specifically for women, and they actually listen and ask questions to help you find the right products to meet your needs. If they wouldn't own it themselves, they won't sell it. Guns for Gals is located at 2035 Central Circle, Suite 108 in McKinney, Texas. Open Monday 1 to 6 and Tuesday through Thursday 11 to 7. And on weekends, you can find them at a gun show near you. Or shop online at www.gunsforgals.com. Guns for Gals, more than just a gun shop. It's how gun shopping should be.
Guys, let me take a moment to talk. I want to get a little serious here for a moment. Something really important that you need to consider if you carry a firearm for self-defense. You need to consider legal protection, because if you end up in a fight that ends up resulting in you having to discharge a firearm, even if you don't discharge your firearm, go back and listen to my interview with Paul Lathrop a couple of years ago. Listen to my interview with Marcus Weldon last year. If you are involved in a self-defense shooting situation, even a situation where you threaten to use a gun but don't actually pull the trigger, you may end up in a legal fight after the fact. Even if you're cleared of all wrongdoing, you may find yourself being sued for simply defending yourself. You need to take precautions and to protect yourself and your family. And the way I do it, what I trust, is the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. Go to armedcitizensnetwork.org and check them out today. They provide legal protection. They provide money to get you out to cover bail. They provide initial retainers for attorneys. They recommend attorneys for your use in case you ever need to use this service. God forbid you ever do. We carry a gun every day because we hope we never have to use it. This is the same thing. It's a very small fee per year. It's absolutely worth it. Check them out. armedcitizensnetwork.org. It's the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. Use the promo code ARMEDLutheran25 and you'll save $25 off your first year's dues. Check them out today. Don't delay. If you're carrying a gun for personal protection, you cannot afford to not have some sort of legal protection as well. Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, armedcitizensnetwork.org.
Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Sylvia.
Hey listeners, I'm Sergeant Bill, and this is your Ballistic Minute. Today I'm going to talk about tools for dry fire. So the nice thing about dry fire is it's pretty inexpensive. You don't really need a whole lot of stuff. You just need your gun and your gear and hopefully a shot timer or something, and you don't even really need that. You can practice and improve. But if you're going to get serious about dry fire, there are a couple things you can pick up or make and will improve your dry fire and make it more useful. One of those things are targets. So you could use a full-size target, but I don't know about you, I don't have enough room in my house to simulate a 20-yard or more shot on a full-size target. But you could either buy or make scaled size targets. Now, scaled size targets you can get in half-size scale or 1/3 scale. I love the 1/3 scale because then every foot is equal to a yard. So when it's on the wall, and you're standing 10 feet away, visually it looks like a target at 10 yards. Now, like I said before, you can print up from the internet some targets that are scaled size targets and then cut those out and trace them onto cardboard. That way they're a little bit more permanent. You can just use those printed out targets and tape those to the wall or something and use those just like that. Nice, easy, simple, cheap. Or one of the only places I've seen you can buy them is at the BenStegerProShop.com, and he sells USPSA, IDPA, half size, 1/3 size targets, even steel, circular steel, mini poppers, full size poppers, anything, that you might encounter at a match, you can get at his website, and they're relatively cheap. Now, when you're dry firing using empty magazines, empty gun, you don't get quite the feel of the weight of the magazine and stuff. And if you're practicing slide lock reloads, an empty magazine is usually going to catch very easily on the edges of the mag well. So using some sort of dummy rounds, no live rounds, using some sort of dummy rounds will make your practice, much more realistic, and it'll put a little weight to the magazine so they feel a little closer to the way they'd feel in a match. Now, if you reload, you can make your own dummy rounds. So you clean the brass, and then you will, punch the primer out. Don't put a primer in it. Don't put any powder in it, but put a bullet in it. Crimp it down. You can actually crimp it down a little heavier than you would normally crimp your ammo. And voila, do 10, 20 of those, and you've got dummy rounds. I've used those in the past. They work pretty dang well. And, if you reload, it's easy. Or if you know somebody that reloads, you can ask them, hey, can you make me some dummy rounds? And it's not a big deal. What I have found is with my realistic dummy rounds, the brass starts to tarnish. If you're using jacketed bullets, they start to tarnish and get kind of nasty. And after a while, the crimp will loosen up and the bullets will come out. Not a huge issue. Just clean them up, crimp them back in, and you're good to go. What I have found is there's another website you can purchase some dummy rounds on. It's stactionpro.com, and basically what they use is mostly nickel brass, which is good because it's not going to tarnish, not near as easily as brass cases will. But they use a bullet insert that's made out of either like a Dayglow green or orange plastic insert that goes all the way down the case. These things work great. They're add a little bit of weight. They're durable. You can always reseat them down in and crimp them down if they start to get a little loose. It takes quite a while. I've done a lot of dry fire with some of the ones that I have, and they're relatively cheap as well. You're talking about $1 a round max for anything. I've got them in 9mm, 40, 45, even 223, and they work fantastic. Now, the last thing you're going to need is a timer, whether it's a full-blown shot timer, which you can get for about $100, maybe a little bit more than that, or you can get some really expensive ones too, if you really want to. I actually started out without a shot timer. I found an app on my phone that I got for free that was a dry fire, training app, and it was a shot timer app, and it worked really well. It doesn't work at the range really, but for doing dry fire, it was perfect. I could set the time for a start beep. It had a delay on the start, so I could hit start and get ready, and then, a second or two later it would beep. I could set a part time on it, and really that's all you need is a delayed start beep and a part time beep, so that, say you're working on draws and you've got it at 1.5 seconds. You hit the start button, get your hands ready by your sides, beep, you draw, beep, there you go. That's what you need. But I will say that eventually, if you're going to keep shooting and doing live fire practice and continue competing, an actual shot timer is best way to go. There are many of them out there. You can get all kinds of different stuff, the little tiny ones, big giant pack ones, the CED ones that are, I think Double Alpha even makes one into a watch now. But it's just, get the features that you want and pay what you want to pay for it. Like I said, you can get them anywhere from $100, maybe even just under $100, all the way up to a couple hundred for the tiniest little watch ones. And I guess last but not least, you need to do some drills. Now, you can just figure out some drills you want to run, draws, reloads, whatever it may be. Look at your match videos. If you're recording a match, if you're shooting, see what you're not doing very well at, and try to, simulate the specifics of what you're not doing very well in dry fire. Maybe it's weak-hand shooting. Maybe it's a draw and a transfer to your weak hand. That's a great thing you can work in dry fire. If you're looking for drills, there's several different people that make books, whether they're, Kindle books or actual paper books, from like Steve Anderson or Ben Steger, and there's drills in there, there's more instruction, and I've actually used both of theirs and several of their books, and they are fantastic. So it's time to go do some dry fire. I'm Sergeant Bill. This has been your Ballistic Minute.
Sergeant Bill Sylvia is a veteran of the Dallas Police Department and masterclass competitive shooter. You can watch Sergeant Bill's shooting videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill.
If you need a good holster, let me take a minute to tell you about my good friends at Cook's Holsters. If you've got a need for a holster for a carry gun, for competition, for a day at the range, check out Cook's Holsters at cooksholsters.com. They're American-made Kydex holsters, custom-made for your specific firearm with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. And trust me, they stand by that guarantee. I know because I've seen it in action. Great people. You've heard Bob Cook on the podcast a couple of times over the last couple of years. He usually comes in at the end of the year on our Christmas show and talks about what's new for the coming year. He makes a fantastic product, and you will not be disappointed. Trust me, I have been using their holsters for years. I found them when I started doing reviews of holsters back when, in the pre-podcast days, back when I was blogging, and I love the product, and I trust it with my own life. You should give them a shot as well. Check them out at cooksholsters.com. Use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and get 10% off your order. Check them out, cooksholsters.com today.
Up next, we're clinging to God and Guns with Pastor John Bennett.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Time now for another Clinging to God and Guns with our good friend Pastor John Bennett, pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. Pastor, welcome back.
You hear that? That's my maximum strength Excedrin, so I'm ready to roll.
Well, it should be a doozy. We're dipping back into pathos.com. It seems to be, they're on a roll lately.
They just can't help themselves.
We keep saying that this is the worst thing we've ever come across, but then somehow you keep finding something worse.
Right.
This one is called The Heresy of the Day, Antinomianism, and it's by Mark Shea. It was released back in November following the Las Vegas shooting. Shea is apparently a Catholic. He's described at the National Catholic Register website as a popular author and speaker. And after you read this, you'll wonder why.
Popular for all the wrong reasons.
Right. Well, aside from his blog and hating Trump and writing a book, I'm not sure exactly what his creds are, but he's clearly ticked off. This, like I said, this is written right several weeks after the Las Vegas shooting. He's clearly pissed that nothing's been done to ban stuff that makes him feel uncomfortable. There's very little scriptural in this, and it's just venting his spleen and really horrible regurgitation of, all the typical anti-gun cliches. And he starts out with a definition of antinomianism. One being one who holds that under the gospel dispensation of grace, the moral law is of no use or obligation because faith alone is necessary to salvation, or one who rejects a socially established morality.
But here's the problem. Well, he got that directly from the Merriam-Webster dictionary.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Any guesses where the term antinomianism originates from? It comes from Luther.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, Luther was the one who coined this term. He's the first ever mention of this term is from Luther, and it goes back to 1527 with the Antinomian controversy. A professor by the name of Johannes Agricola was teaching at Wittenberg that basically Christians don't need the law. They're no longer under the law because they're under grace. That it's not the law that brings one to repentance and contrition over sin, but rather it's the gospel alone. Well, Paul is the one who said, if the law had said, do not covet, I would not have known it was a sin to covet. Just that's a very rough paraphrase, not a direct quotation.
Right.
Luther actually barred Agricola from teaching any further until he recanted, but the weaselly rascal that Agricola was, he continued to teach secretly this antinomianism. So this guy doesn't even have a grasp on what antinomianism is because he's relying on Merriam-Webster to give him the definition. And I'm sure he prefers the second point of Merriam-Webster's definition, that one who rejects a socially established morality. It's not society that establishes morality. It is God who is the origin of all moral behavior.
Right.
So, if we take the second definition, well, then it's every single sin that people enjoy in this country that society has given their imprimatur on is perfectly okay.
And
just
so
because society says it is.
Right. And if society defines something as, or if society wants to deem something as illegal, like gun ownership, then if you oppose that, you must reject society's established morality. That's where I'm guessing where he's going. Antinomianism, he says, is a favorite heresy of the gun cult. And this is fun. The gun cult, just to refresh your memory, is not people who enjoy shooting or collecting guns. The gun cult, in a word, but he uses more than a word, is anybody who prefers the good known as a gun over the higher good of human life and who acts to exalt guns and arms industry profits at the cost of human life. Calling us a cult is rich coming from a guy who, prays to saints and thinks that a guy in a funny hat in Rome is infallible, but I digress.
Which, if you read some of his other blog posts, I just quickly looked at some of the titles and the summaries. He really likes Pope Frankie. The first SJW Pope.
Yes. I got the impression that he would like him very much. One of the lies the gun cult tells in order to achieve this end is the lie of antinomianism. It goes like this. You can't outlaw evil. That's not antinomianism. What the hell? He gives a definition and then doesn't even... Good Lord.
The stupid is strong with this one.
Well, first, before we move on, I actually searched for this exact quote that he's put here, and he put this thing in quotes. You can't outlaw evil. And I found like 3 uses of it. One was a kid from UT Austin who was asked his thoughts about Campus Carry back in 2015. Another one was actually a liberal back in 2013 who said, "Yeah, we can't outlaw evil, but we can outlaw guns." And so I don't know where the only thing I can figure is he's responding to people like Governor Matt Bevin, who said after the Las Vegas shooting that we can't regulate evil. Maybe that's what he is referring to. I couldn't find this exact phrase, but
it's like we've said on this before. Murder is already illegal,
right?
What's interesting though is he's taking a broad definition of antinomianism, which just literally means against the law, and we already have this law called the Second Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
So who's a stinking antinomian now, man?
Well, the suggestion that we're antinomians because we want to keep our guns and oppose gun control suggests that we are sinners by having guns, but we figure we can keep on sinning because of God's grace.
I guess.
Right?
I guess.
Because isn't that what the basis for, the whole Antinomian thing is not necessarily an opposition to temporal laws, but that we can sin freely because we know we're saved.
Right. And I don't know if that was Agricola's intention, but that's where his teachings led.
Right.
That we can live however we please because we have the gospel. And, well, that's not what Paul says in Romans 6, where he says that just because we have grace, should we go on sinning? Absolutely not. But and I think all of this comes back to taking the second point of Merriam-Webster's definition, one who rejects a socially established morality. So because he lives in this bubble, this microcosm of liberalism and anti-gun sentiment, he just projects his perception on the rest of society and says, society has established this as morality and you're rejecting it, so you're an antinomian. It's just, I think God, I took my Excedrin this morning. You should start getting sponsorship for that. We've given them a lot of free advertising.
I really should. I think I will reach out to Tylenol or whoever the people are who make that stuff. Because we're probably driving people to their door.
Either that or Jim Beam.
Yes, absolutely. That just opens up a whole new possibilities for sponsorship. This lie is trotted out to passionately defend one form of evil and one only: gun violence. If we took this lie seriously across the board, it would mean the elimination of all law and attempts at fighting crime in every segment of human society. That it is a lie, a cynical, idiotic, absurd, and stupid lie, is seen the moment every law and order conservative who regurgitates it turns from defending his gun idol, in all caps, to any other sin, crime, or trespass in the world. You sure as hell did not hear Donald Trump say you can't outlaw evil when a Muslim killed 8 people in Lower Manhattan the other day. All of a sudden, law could do a lot, according to the people who insist law can do nothing when a white guy is mowing down 500 people with a gun. Jeez, he goes racist.
Yes, he does. Surprise, surprise. But he basically makes the jump that for those who hold to this principle that, murder is already illegal, or as he puts it, you can't outlaw evil, that, well, if that's the case, then we should just get rid of all laws if you can't outlaw it.
There's not a single person on earth who's proposing that. Well, there might be some weirdo, but that's not at all what we're saying. Because we don't want more laws doesn't mean we want none. What the hell? We already have a crap load of laws. Nobody's suggesting that laws don't serve a purpose or that we should not fight crime. That's just, talking about idiotic and absurd. Gun control does nothing to stop stuff like Las Vegas or Sutherland Springs because the laws that they propose don't work.
Right.
That's why we oppose them. Not because we're antinomians.
Yeah, if only we had stricter gun laws in Chicago.
Right, yeah. That'll work out great. And the line about the Muslim kid who killed 8 people in New York, just a subtle swipe to suggest that gun people are racists. But the reason that Trump didn't say that you can't outlaw evil after the attack in New York is because nobody on the left was suggesting we ban cars.
Right.
Or that we make it harder for Muslims to drive them.
Let's be fair. We have a lot of environmental wackadoos that think we would all be riding bicycles, but...
Well, that's true. See, that wouldn't have happened if we were all riding bikes. That would have been kind of... All he would have done is knock people over.
He might have used a horse and carriage instead.
That's right. And, of course, the people who lie that law is worthless... Nobody is arguing that law is worthless.
It sounds like he's the one that's arguing law is worthless.
Really? He's trying to convince people that that's what we think. All he's doing is proving how stupid he is. Nobody on earth is making this argument. Of course, the people who lie that the law is worthless because you can't outlaw evil believe so deeply that the law is not worthless when it comes to abortion that they will stake absolutely everything on the faith that electing an incompetent, corrupt sex predator who spits in the faces of Gold Star families and POWs will be absolutely worth it when he outlaws the evil of abortion by magic. So now the true face comes out. It's like he's just going to let his
feel your anger.
In case anybody didn't catch that, he's talking about Trump. And the POW he's referring to was Trump's rudeness to John McCain.
Oh, well, and the Khan family, the guy that the Democrat Party trotted out during their convention. But not even to address the stupid Trump stuff, because it's not even remotely related, except to just indicate to us that this is all politics and not actual deep thought. Nobody is saying that the law is worthless. What we're saying is that the laws we have should actually work. And passing laws just for the sake of, adding another law to make it more illegaler is, to use this guy's own words, it's worthless.
Right. Well, here's the blind stupidity here, that he accuses pro-life people of thinking that if they just elect the right people, that they'll magically outlaw abortion. But he is sitting here advocating that if we had stricter gun laws, we could magically get rid of gun violence.
Yep.
And let's be honest, there aren't any rational thinking pro-life advocates that think that we're ever going to completely get rid of abortion. It's never going to happen. We can't do it. And I'm not saying that because I'm some sort of fatalist, but it is the law. And no matter what, no matter how much we fight, we're not going to fully get rid of all forms of abortion. I don't think it's ever going to happen. I wish it would. But he's the one who, in his blind stupidity, thinks that if we just have the right laws, we're going to get rid of gun violence.
But the funny thing is that the kind of laws that he wants to see passed, even the people who suggest them say they wouldn't have stopped any of the previous shootings.
Exactly.
So why the hell are we even fighting to pass them?
Beats me. Just because it makes him feel better.
The lie that you can't outlaw evil is as an excuse for doing absolutely nothing to oppose the evil of gun violence is just that, a lie. Of course, why did he put asterisks around that? Are we supposed to say that or
because
read
it
that?
looks fancy.
It looks fancy. Of course, you will never eliminate evil in the world by force of law. But nonetheless, you do try to craft laws that will help fight and reduce works of evil and punish those who do them. We already have laws that punish those who do works of evil. What the? We have laws, like you said, we have laws against murder. We've got laws against rape and burglary and assaulting people. We even have, I know based on this article, he doesn't realize this. We already have laws that determine who can and cannot purchase or own guns.
Right.
But we only enforce those less than 1% of the time when they're violated. So, and that's why we have everything from the USDA keeping you from being poisoned to laws against burglary. If a given law does not work or can be improved, you replace it or improve it. If somebody breaks into your house, you don't declare laws against burglary futile and pointless. You do not lie that since all evil cannot be eliminated, all law is futile. Again, we're not... we're not suggesting that laws are futile. And the USDA doesn't keep us from being poisoned.
Yes. How often do you hear about Chipotle being in the news because somebody got gonorrhea from their lettuce or something,
Well,
that's how you get gonorrhea, but you know what I mean.
Right. Never eating at Chipotle again.
But he throws this out If someone breaks into your house, you don't declare laws against burglary futile and pointless. Are you just supposed to say, let's make burglary really, really illegal, more illegal than it already is, and maybe people won't break in?
It's extra illegal. And the USDA thing, I mean, I actually wanted to look that up. Does the USDA actually prevent us from being poisoned? No, 48 million Americans get foodborne illnesses every year, and 3,000 of them die. So much for the government coming and saving us from food poisoning. At this point in the argument, it is customary to either demand an instant comprehensive program that will, quote-unquote, solve gun violence, prefatory to picking it to death or simply dismissing it on the grounds that it will not eliminate 100% of all gun deaths. Who does this guy argue with? I mean, first he goes on this, he starts out on the rant that we can't outlaw evil, and because we can't outlaw evil, we shouldn't have any laws, which is not something that any of us has ever argued. And now he suggests that those of us in the gun rights community, our next point is, well, you have to have a perfect plan to solve gun violence. Nobody's saying that. Anybody in the gun rights community would be willing and open to listening to ideas that will actually make a difference. Not the same old cliched knee-jerk reactions, but something that would actually make a difference. We know there's not going to be a perfect solution. And that's the reason that I think that's what sets us apart from the left on this issue. We know there's not an easy solution to this problem. And they seem to think that gun laws are going to instantly make us safer.
I would love to live in a world where, gosh, if we just did the right things and passed the right laws, we'd have nirvana. We'd have a perfect utopia. But I'm a little too intelligent to believe that's possible because we live in a sinful and fallen world. To go back to Cain and Abel, if only they had rock control.
Right. Why didn't God ban rocks?
Or at least rocks over a certain weight.
Right, we'd be so much better off. But I propose something much more modest. And here's the first of the anti-gun cliches. Let the CDC do the study of gun violence that the gun-controlled GOP has been blocking in Congress for 21 years. You know, so that we have something called quote-unquote facts, so that we can know what we are talking about in preparation for actually acting to reduce our gun slaughter rate from the highest in the civilized world to something less barking insane.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm going to read the next paragraph because the two go together, and they're so stupid it makes my head hurt. I'm going to have to go and get some... God is a God of light. Darkness hates light, which is why the gun cult fights this study, because it desires darkness and ignorance to prevail and mammon to be exalted over human life. I advocate light. Let the CDC at long last do the study. If you oppose it, you love the status quo, meaning you seek to protect both ignorance and death. It really is that simple. Choose life, not death. This is so moronically stupid that if we only let the CDC do a study, we'd have life? This is just so colossally pig ignorant.
No one is blocking the CDC from studying gun violence. No one. Here's the thing. Okay, this goes back to the 1996 Dickey Amendment, which stated quite simply, none of the funds made available for injury prevention and control at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention may be used to advocate or promote gun control. So what did the CDC do after that? They took the $2.6 million that they had been budgeted for studying quote-unquote gun violence, and they used that to study traumatic brain injury instead. So if the CDC was prohibited from using public funds, taxpayer dollars, to advocate or promote gun control, and they suddenly spend that money on traumatic brain injury instead, what does it tell you the CDC was spending that money on in the first place?
Yep.
The CDC is still collecting data on quote-unquote gun violence.
Exactly.
But they are barred from using taxpayer dollars to push a political point.
Yes, exactly. And this is so cliched. And when this guy talks about facts and being informed and desiring that we get rid of ignorance and come out into the light, this guy doesn't know jack.
No.
Because we can, the law doesn't prevent doing straight up research as long as it's not advocacy research where we're trying to actually, push a political position. And there's nothing stopping private research. There's plenty of private research.
Yes. We've got the Brady Group. We've got Moms Demand Action. We've got all these
Bloomberg and his millions of dollars every year.
And it's not the GOP-controlled Congress. It hasn't been controlled by the GOP for 21 years. You had several years during the Obama administration when it wasn't controlled by the GOP.
It's the automatic reaction that if we don't get what we want, if Congress doesn't do what we want on gun control, then it must be the GOP that's blocking everything. It's the GOP's fault. It's those darn gun cult GOP members. When in 2008, 2009, 2010, Obama had complete control of Congress and veto-proof majorities, but it's the GOP's fault.
Yeah. Even though the CDC could easily have done a study, but because they're prohibited from doing advocacy with taxpayer dollars, they didn't. Mm-hmm. And the origin of the Dickey Amendment, this is an article from Politico. So this is by Chris Cox of the NRA, but it's printed in Politico, which Politico is a left-of-center website, right? And this is from an article titled Why We Can't Trust the CDC with Gun Research. And I just want to read 3 paragraphs from this. It says, government-funded research was openly biased in the 1990s. CDC officials unabashedly supported gun bans and poured millions of dollars into quote-unquote research that was in fact advocacy. One of the lead researchers employed in the CDC's effort was quoted stating, "We're going to systematically build the case that owning firearms causes death." Another researcher said he envisioned a long-term campaign to convince Americans that guns are, first and foremost, a public health menace. One of the effort's lead researchers was a prominent attendee at a conference called the Handgun Epidemic Lowering Plan Network, which was intended to form a public health model to work towards changing society's attitudes towards guns so that it becomes socially unacceptable for private citizens to have guns. The problem with these conclusions is that they came before the data, which was manipulated to support their agenda. The spin was so egregious that Congress acted and forbade the use of taxpayer funds for such biased, agenda-driven research.
All right, so this guy's complaining about not having any facts, but here's some facts that maybe our esteemed neckbeard doesn't know. In a nation of over 300 million people, we have only 12,000 people die of gun-related homicide every year. We know the vast majority, like you keep pointing out, the vast majority of gun violence deaths are criminals killing criminals. Overall, the homicide rate has been declining for, 50 years? Levels off for a time or two, but the general trend has been downward for 50 years. We know the majority of violent crime, this is another statistic that you point out, the majority of violent crime is centered around major cities, most of those run by one particular party and heavily gun controlled. We know from independent research, there was something that popped up on my timeline the other day. It was an article from last year, a study that showed that only about 16% of gun crimes are committed by people who actually legally own the gun that they use to commit the crime.
Huh, imagine that.
Imagine that. We know from studies, actual peer-reviewed studies by Duke University and the University of Pittsburgh, that only about 2% of criminals acquire their guns at gun shows, but we're constantly screaming about closing the gun show loophole. Then, of course, there's this whole CDC thing. I mean, we don't desire darkness, as this guy tries to point out or suggest. We just don't like propaganda.
Right. Right.
So back to the article. Oh, and stop saying it's a heart problem, not a gun problem. when you tell that lie, what you're really saying is that Americans are uniquely sinful out of the whole human race, and that why we slaughter each other and ourselves with guns more than the rest of the civilized world. No, we are not uniquely evil. We have easy access to guns, and that's why we slaughter ourselves and each other with guns more than the rest of the world. It's a gun problem.
Yeah, no. Of all the nations in the world, guess where the United States ranks in instances of quote-unquote gun violence per the number of guns? Keeping in mind that we have the largest number of guns per people in the entire world. Guess where we rank out of the 195 countries?
Number one, right? I mean, we're number one.
This guy would love to think so. We are the 28th lowest.
Well, shocker.
Shocker. Here's another little tidbit of information. If you take suicide out of the picture, we rank 18th in homicides committed with a firearm. So you've got Honduras and Venezuela, Guatemala, El Salvador, Colombia, Brazil, Panama, Philippines, Mexico, Costa Rica. All these, most of them are South American countries. And guess what? They have strict gun control.
Yep. We do not slaughter ourselves more than the rest of the world, even when you consider just gun violence. I mean, if you want just to look at the slaughter rate, to use his terminology, I guess, the murder rate in the U.S. is like 4.8 per 100,000, right?
Something like that, yeah.
That ranks us like 96th or 97th. So there's 96 or 97 other countries ahead of us. Countries with very strict gun control laws. Russia is at 11. They've got less than half our population, 3 times the homicide rate, and more total murders than we do every year. Mexico, which has really, really strict gun control laws, 16. Brazil, 26. They may be great in soccer, but the national pastime is dodging bullets.
I hate to laugh, but it's true.
Honduras, 63. El Salvador, 108 at the top of the list. Venezuela, that socialist paradise, a country 1/10 our size with 12 times more murders per capita, 57 per 100,000. And they've got more total murders per year than we do. But they're not civilized, I guess. They're not civilized countries, so we only compare us to the civilized countries, I guess.
That's racist. He's calling them uncivilized.
Really?
Does he not like brown people now?
Apparently.
Isn't that usually the accusation leveled against conservatives when we talk about things like stopping illegal immigration?
Well, if you're going to suggest that your comparison is only to the quote-unquote civilized world in order to make us look worse than we really are, then yeah, you're basically saying all these brown-skinned folks are not civilized.
Hey, his words, not mine.
And by the way, when you make that argument, you are also inevitably arguing, just as we should do nothing to keep small arms out of the hands of criminals, maniacs, morons, domestic abusers, stalkers, and terrorists, and instead just pray for their hearts to change, nobody's arguing this.
Right. And we already do everything we can to do exactly just that.
Right. But he continues, so you also must mean that we should do the same thing with really big arms when it comes to Kim Jong-un and ISIS. There it is, the stupidest thing you will hear all day.
Yes. I don't want to say it's the stupidest thing we'll ever hear when we're doing this podcast because, as we've been proven before,
right?
Never say never.
And we still have a couple or 3 more paragraphs, so he's still got time to impress us. Now, like you said, we already have laws to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and maniacs and domestic abusers and stalkers and terrorists. And as for morons, just go to a public range and you'll see we can't legislate stupid. But if we did, this guy would be in trouble. This paragraph. And this one's fantastic. I take it back. This one is stupider. the argument that typically comes next is that that we don't allow people to own bazookas and nuclear weapons, so we do allow some gun control. The argument that is typically trotted out against us. Well, here's the worst possible use of that line of reasoning. It's not a nuke problem, it's a heart problem, is something only a fool would say.
Like this guy.
And that's why nobody says it, you moron. Come on. How do we deal with rogue countries that have nukes? Or, I mean, before Obama started selling nukes.
I was going to say, because, give them millions and millions of dollars like we did with Iran.
Right. Before Obama, we used to make sure that those countries knew that there would be a price to pay if they used a nuke.
Mutually assured destruction.
So with guns, same reasoning. You want to make sure that every responsible citizen in the country knows that they don't have to have a gun, but they have a right to have one for their protection. And criminals who suspect that their prey is armed, they're not going to, if this is borne out in research by actually interviewing these people in prison, they would prefer not to attack people if they suspect they have guns.
Right.
So they go look for easier prey.
Right. Well, yeah, it's if you ask most criminals, they prefer to avoid lead poisoning at all costs.
Right, exactly. Have a strict aversion to lead poisoning.
Now, I got to warn you, though, I think the next sentence is these... it ranks up there with the stupidest sentences in this piece.
He's running a close second if it's not, But this lie is one of the core lies the gun cult tells every day about a slightly smaller grade of weapon, and they say it while lying that the Second Amendment exists so that we can make war on the constitutional order that gives us the Second Amendment. That was tried in 1861. Bad idea.
Did you catch what he was saying there? He was referring to those firearms that you can own legally as a slightly smaller grade of weapon than a nuke.
Well,
I can't kill 1 million people in one shot with my gun. It's not a slightly smaller grade of weapon.
It's an order of magnitude smaller. Oh my gosh. And then the Second Amendment doesn't exist so we can make war on the constitutional order. 1861, the Civil War was not about the Second Amendment. Oh
no.
God. Historically illiterate to his list of accomplishments. Oh my God. Fat, drunk, and stupid is no way to go through life. If you plan to make war on the supposedly tyrannical U.S. government, be aware you are bringing your cache of small arms to a fight with a state that has drones. Here's the other thing you hear all the time. Drones, tanks, high-altitude bombers, and tactical nukes. If it is as tyrannical as you claim, it will use them against you while you and the whack job militia are in your living room knocking back brewskis and planning your next assault on a bird sanctuary, and you will never see it coming. It's like he's dredged up every clueless anti-gun argument that the left has ever trotted out and pasted them into this article like they're some kind of enlightened new thinking. Oh, you think you can defend against a tyrannical government with your AR-15 because the government's got tanks?
But in all fairness to this guy, we haven't heard the argument before with such a magnitude of stupidity mixed into it.
This is true. This is true. Credit where credit is due.
Don't want to shortchange him.
Right. Best construction on everything. And the fallacy that the military is just like the Republican Guard in Iran or something and just going to fall into line and nuke their own families is insane. If the government turned tyrannical and we had to defend the country against a tyrannical government, guess what most of the military would probably do?
Yeah, exactly.
They would
maybe not, your people at the higher echelons who are political appointees, but the majority of the average men and women in the armed forces are fairly politically conservative.
Well, and they're probably not going to simply follow orders when that order is drop a nuke on your neighbors.
Right.
Kill your family that's, decided to side with the government or against the government.
Right.
So by all means, pray for conversion of hearts, but also don't hand murderous people guns because they make it really easy to mow down 500 people in ways that a rock or a penknife does not. Every sensible person in the world, except members of the gun cult, lying that you can't outlaw evil, gets that.
Yeah, I missed the part in the gun laws where we hand murderous people guns that can mow down 500 people.
The only people handing guns to murderous people, in fact, is our government, if you think about it. They didn't stop the guy in Charleston at the church in Charleston when he shouldn't have had a gun. Our government allowed him to get one. There was the guy in the two in San Bernardino. They did nothing about, ignored the warnings. There was the Orlando killer, did nothing about him. The guy in New York, the one that he references in this article, the guy who ran over the people in Lower Manhattan, the government knew about him, did nothing, didn't open a case on him despite his connections to terrorism.
And he was brought into the country through the diversity lottery program as well.
Yes.
Thank you, government.
Yes.
But, the Sutherland Springs shooter,
failed to stop him.
Yeah.
The government. And he worked for the government.
He worked for the government. He was convicted of a felony by the government.
And let's not forget, we sold guns to Mexican drug cartels.
Yes. Who have used those guns to kill border agents.
And hundreds of people in Mexico.
Yes.
What are your final thoughts on this? I mean, this isn't like our typical, he uses very little scripture. This is just venting and letting your hate flag fly, basically.
Yeah, the closest he gets to bringing scripture into this is a couple paragraphs before the end of the article, where he says, "God is a God of light; darkness hates light." Well, what did David say in Psalm 27? "The Lord is my light and my salvation; whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me to eat up my flesh, my adversaries and foes, it is they who stumble and fall." How did they stumble and fall? At the sword of David and his men. Yep. So David didn't say the Lord is my light, and then he suddenly turned into a pacifist and God just miraculously wiped out his enemies. God gave him victory over his enemies through the use of force.
Right.
This article is a perfect example of how, if you have bought the lies hook, line, and sinker about quote unquote gun violence, as if it's the guns doing these acts of evil as opposed to an evil person pulling the trigger, then yeah, all of this makes perfect sense. But because he's bought the lies hook, line, and sinker, he will refuse to see any evidence to the contrary. He talks about facts and quotes. Well, everything that he puts forward in this article is a quote-unquote fact. In other words, not a fact. Conjecture, lies, deception, providing...
Flat out ignorance.
Yes. Without providing a shred of evidence to support anything he says.
Right. Let's talk about the Antinomian thing, because he applies this, suggests that that Antinomianism is our favorite heresy. As Christians, how should we view the law? Should we simply, if someone proposes a law that supposedly that they claim is going to make us safer, if we reject that law out of hand, are we somehow are we in the wrong there? Should we, as Christians, should we support law just because it's for the common good, supposedly?
Well, it all comes down to what St. Peter said before the Jewish authorities back in the book of Acts. I want to say it's chapter 4. They had just been arrested for preaching the gospel. They were told to no longer preach the gospel or further punishment would come their way. They were then released. But before they were released, when they were commanded to no longer preach the gospel, Peter responds, "It is better to obey God rather than men." So, first and foremost, if there are any laws that are directly contradictory to the Christian faith, such as abortion and the like, then we ought to fight against those laws because they fly in the face of God's word. When it comes to the rest of laws that are purely secular in nature, well, we can, according to our Christian freedom, pick and choose those laws which we wish to support, as long as we're not making a decision regarding our faith. So when it comes to this idea of antinomianism, really what's happening here is he's setting himself up as an antinomian because he rails against the laws. He insists that we need more laws to stop quote-unquote gun violence. He rails against gun owners who are opposed to gun control. And really what he's doing all along is he is opposing the established laws of the government. So as, when it comes back to our obligation as Christians, we have what Paul writes in Romans 13, where we are obligated to be obedient to the government, to submit to the authorities and so forth. Understand that in light of what happens in the book of Acts and with what St. Peter says, that as long as it doesn't conflict with our faith as God's children.
All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for this week's edition. Thank you for joining us, Pastor. And if any of you have questions about anything you heard here, any comments or concerns, send us a email or a voice message or a voicemail by visiting our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. And we would love to hear from you and respond to your comments or questions on a future episode. Tune in again next time for another edition of Clinging to God and Guns right here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org.
And that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. Thank you all for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. Thank you to our fine sponsors who make all this possible. Thank you to my awesome cast of contributors. And thank you, dear listener, for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. I hope you'll join us again next week. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.